So today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about TimberScan Titanium for Sage 100 Contractor. So basically the way that we refer to Titanium, we refer to it as a purchase-to-pay solution, meaning that it handles everything associated with an accounts payable invoice from the initial purchase all the way through the pay process. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to necessarily implement everything all at once if you don't want, but it does have the ability for you to be able to manage everything from the invoice when it first arrives at your door, through the workflow process that you may have created, off to the approvers, and then once the approvals are done and you've updated Sage 100 Contractor, we can also handle the pay side of the equation too. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in here. So two things to note. There are kind of two sides to the equation. As I mentioned, there's the managing the AP invoice on the front end, and then there's the pay. So for some of you, you may be aware that TimberScan Titanium was actually created by a company called Core Associates, which is where I came from. And we developed that for Sage 100 Contractor, I'd say around 2016, maybe something like that, 2015, 16. So it's been around a while. We have many clients. And we used it as our solution for Sage 100 Contractor on the AP workflow side of things. When we were acquired by AvidXchange at the end of 2020, we were acquired by a company that is actually the leading provider of payment solutions to middle market companies, not just construction, but to other industries as well. What we did was we then married our technologies together so that we took Titanium for managing AP invoices, and we built into that the ability to manage pay as well. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to walk us through a workflow process all the way from the initial invoice itself, all the way through the pay. Now, typically when I meet with a client one-on-one, or someone who's interested in perhaps implementing TimberScan Titanium, usually the first thing that I will do is I'll ask them what their current process is. And for the most part, I get a lot of different answers, but in many ways, it all kind of comes back to being the same thing. Most everything's being done manually. It's all being done by hand. It's all being done with paper. Invoices come in. They have to be put in someone's folder. That person then has to review it and maybe hand code on the invoice how they want the invoice to be coded to what job, what cost code, whatever. And then it goes to accounting, and accounting goes through, and they will then enter that invoice into Sage 100 Contractor in order to get the invoice processed. So with Titanium, what we've done is we've taken that manual process. I should add one other thing. So once Sage 100 Contractor gets updated with the information, then usually the checks are cut. They're cut by hand. Someone has to put the checks in an envelope, and then they have to be mailed out. With TimberScan Titanium, what we've done is we've perfected this process and eliminated the steps of having to manage paper all along the way. And instead, what we've done is we've created an electronic workflow process. And it starts at the point where an invoice arrives at your door. Regardless of how you receive the invoice initially, to get it into Titanium, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to use different tools that I'll talk about to get it into the system. But once it gets acquired, it's an electronic image that is visible, and it's visible not only for us to be able to process the invoice, but also to manage. What I mean by manage is be able to see it all along the way if we need to, and understand where it is. It doesn't necessarily get put in someone's folder and then that person, ignores it for 2 weeks and no one knows where the invoice is. Everything's going to be visible, and that's one of the things I'm going to focus on. So we're going to start by getting the invoice into the system. Once it's in, then we go to what we call initial data entry. This is where accounts payable will start entering the invoice in Titanium. And you might say, well, we usually, have someone who's an approver, maybe a project manager, actually code it first. Well, hypothetically, if it came directly to them, they could still do that. But what we typically do is we'll enter the invoice into Titanium up to the point where accounts payable knows what they need to know. For example, maybe they just know the header information, the vendor, the invoice number, the date, the amount, and maybe they know what job it's associated with. And that's it. They send it off to the approvers based on the business rules that are set up within TimberScan Titanium. And these can be very elaborate or they can be very simple. So if, for example, you said, well, we normally would route to the project manager on the job. We can pull the project manager information directly from the job in Sage 100 Contractor and apply it so that it goes off to the approver that way. But you could say, well, no, we have circumstances where there are multiple approvers, we have thresholds, all those things can be taken into account in Titanium when you go to the process of setting up your workflows, so that it makes it very easy. When I start this initial coding in accounts payable, I just say I'm going to accept the invoice and off it goes to the approvers. Once the approval process is done, the invoices update Sage 100 Contractor. Not only do we send over the data, we also send over the images. So if I'm in Sage 100 Contractor, I could call up the invoice data for a particular invoice, maybe on a job or even in vendor or whatever, wherever I want it to be. But I could also pull up the attached images as well. The other thing that we do, and this is that kind of that back end piece that I've been referring to a couple of times, is we can eliminate you having to print checks. I think that I understand that there's a mentality within the industry of being able to print checks and kind of manage that process manually. But again, we can eliminate that manual step. We can allow for those what would normally be sent to a check printer to be managed from within our application and then released to be paid to the vendor, just like as if we were a bank that was issuing the payment, on your behalf. So we'll talk about that when we get to that part as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through a workflow process, but in order to do that, I'm also going to cover some of the benefits of what it means to be, using a purchase to pay application like TimberScan Titanium. So really there are three things that I'm going to cover today, and you're going to hear me talk about these a number of different times. One of them is gaining visibility. So what we talk about with gaining visibility is the ability to see things in a number of different ways. So I can see not only the invoice, I know exactly where it is at all times. I don't have to worry about having to look around and see, whose folder the invoice happens to be sitting in. All of that's going to be visible to me. It's going to be right on the screen for me. I don't have to go into Sage 100 Contractor to start to look up some of the more detailed information about an invoice. We have something called tooltips where I could be looking at an invoice. I could be seeing the job information or purchase order information, and it automatically will allow me to pull up details about the purchase order and the job. In terms of efficiency, I think I've already started to touch on this. We're going to eliminate the paper. We're going to create workflows, help you create these workflows that are going to make it much easier to be able to get the invoices routed. The ability to acquire the documents, get them into the system in a number of different ways. And then on the back end, being able to go ahead and execute payment without having to go through that manual process of printing checks, putting checks in envelopes, and mailing them out. So we're going to talk about visibility, efficiency, and the timely process of being able to automate your pay. We're going to cover all three of these as we go through the application. So with that, let's do this. We're not going to go to questions just yet. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of here. And we are going to jump right into, you see I've already logged into Sage 100 Contractor, but we're not going to start there. We're actually going to start in Titanium. let's go back here to the master screen. Okay, so we talk about visibility. One of the areas where we can gain more visibility is when you first log into the system, you notice how Titanium has a nice dashboard for you to be able to see. In this case, I'm logged in as an administrator, so I have access to be able to see everyone. With that, I can see how many outstanding invoices we have for the entire organization, what my total outstanding payables are, what's overdue. You can see, obviously, we've got a lot that needs to be paid. And then as I start to work my way down through these dashboard widgets, I can see by vendor, by job, by cost code, by who it's assigned to, by workflow, and then we've got other details further down that I can drill into. Now in here, if I start to hover the mouse on the pie chart, you notice how it pops up these tooltips, and it will show me who the vendor is and what the total dollar amount is that we have outstanding with that vendor. So again, we're talking about visibility here. Here's one very easy, very straightforward way that I'm able to kind of see where things are depending on what project we're talking about, what cost codes we could be, have outstanding, those types of things. Let's go one step further. So again, talking about visibility. As an administrator, I'm logged in. I can see all the users. But if I wanted, I could jump in and I could jump down to a particular person and I could see just their invoices. So when I'm doing this, now I'm just going to get just the ones for Sandra. So she happens to have 5 outstanding invoices. Here's the dollar amount. And again, I've got the ability to see what vendors, what jobs she's working on, cost codes that she may have outstanding invoices for, and those types of things. So you have the flexibility of being able to see things from the top level view or drilling down into individual users and seeing things from that level. Now, if I were not an administrator, maybe I'm a project manager, and I log in, all I'm going to see on this dashboard are just my invoices. If I don't have administrative rights or the ability to see other people's invoices, then I'm not going to do that. So we provide visibility, but we also provide it with some guardrails that allow for not being able to necessarily see things that I'm not supposed to see. Let's go a couple steps further here. Let's actually jump into an invoice. I want to show you a little bit more when we talk about visibility. So I'm going to come in here. We'll go to invoice entry. I'm going to bring up an invoice, and we're going to come back and I'm going to talk about this a little bit further. But one of the things that you'll notice here, here's an invoice that's, somewhat coded already. And you'll notice that on the invoice, I have, for example, the purchase order number, the vendor, the job. I've got all the way down to the cost code. But notice these little inquiry buttons here. So if I wanted to just click on this, I'm seeing my commitment summary. Here's the committed amount. Here's what's been invoiced. Here's what's in Titanium and the balance. On the job, I can see the current contract amount, what's been invoiced to date, what's remaining, budget and changes, cost to date, balance on the budget. If any of these went negative, I would be able to, it would highlight this in red for me. In fact, let's see if we may have something. Let's go to cost code. Yep, here's a scenario here. So you see how the budget, cost to date, what's in TimberScan, that total exceeds the budget. So you notice how the balance on the budget goes negative and it's highlighted in red. So these tooltips are available throughout the application in various places where I can just click on them and I'm able to call up and I'm able to see certain information. What I could also do is if I needed to, for example, I could select any particular field, like I'm on the vendor code right here, and if I click on the history button, I'm able to see all of the invoices for that particular vendor. Let me make sure I got this highlighted here. Here we go. So in this case, there's just one invoice for this particular vendor that we have in the system or that we've processed so far. But not only can I see the actual invoice itself, but then I can go down and I can see how it was coded. I can see all the line item information. So I get that level of detail. I can do the same thing with a purchase order. Do the history on the PO, and I can see, what we've done. There's only been one invoice charged, but again, I can get all the line item info if I need to do from the PO. Also on the purchase order, I can do something which we call the commitment summary. And now I can see basically any purchase order that we process against this particular vendor. And again, down to the line item level if I want to see how it's been coded. So I have all of that. So there's, as you can see, just at the outset here, there are just a number of different things and a number of different ways that I can see information literally at my fingertips. It's right here on the screen if I need to see it. Okay, so with that, let's also talk about a couple of other things here. You've got various reports. We talked about the dashboard. There are inquiries built throughout the system. If I wanted to just do kind of a basic invoice status inquiry, for example, what you'll notice is that you have a lot of options in here. So if I said, I just want to isolate this to a particular vendor or maybe just a particular project, I go out, I can search the job. I could say, let's just do this for the Wood Elementary job, for example, and the system will then skinny the list down and it will show me in this kind of grid format, the various invoices that have been transacted against that particular job. If I want to add and say show job cost, I get more detail, more information on my spreadsheet here. So I've got all of this available to me. And then if I click on the report button, what I can do is I could say, let me go ahead and I'm going to create a report and I'm going to combine the images with the report. And it lets me determine what I want to download here. So basically what I did, if I just back up here for a moment, is I went in, I selected based on the fact that I said I wanted to see information about this job. I could have put in a date range, for example. Here's my job that I wanted to focus on. Here are the invoices for that job for that particular time period. I said, show me the job cost, which gives me more detail, the job, all the different information associated with it. Then I go one step further and I say, okay, let's just go ahead and create a report. I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to download the images. And when I do that, I determine, do I want to just include the invoices? Do I want all the supporting documents that may have been attached? I've got all of that available to me. And then when I do that, what the system will do is it will generate a report that looks like this. So it's a little hard to read here. I could probably make it a little bit larger, but just to get the idea here. Header information, all my details, and then as I work my way down, see how it attaches every single invoice that I selected. So if you had any scenario where you had to do a substantiated billing, a cost plus, a time and material type of work, or maybe for a loan draw or, some other scenario, literally in a matter of seconds, you can create that type of report and you can just go ahead and download it and send it off if need be. Okay, let's add one more piece to the puzzle when it comes to visibility. Actually, two more. One, throughout the system, you have notifications. The notifications give you the opportunity to be able to set up and alert anyone that you need to for whatever purpose you need to. So if I said, I want to be able to send a notification to someone when they receive an invoice, initially I can do that. Then I can add more notifications for doing things like maybe I want to alert someone if they have an invoice that's been sitting with them for greater than 5 days, or it's within 3 days of the discount date or something like that. So that's all built into the system. And then finally, the one other thing that we can do from the visibility perspective, if I come over here, let's go to accounts payable. I'm just going to go ahead and pull up an invoice. Let's take this last invoice here. So what I did was I processed an invoice for Peterson Construction from Titanium, sent it over here to Sage 100 Contractor. So it's updated Sage 100 with all of my detailed information. And not only did it send over all of the data, including how it's been costed, I can show the job cost here, but it also attached the invoice images. So in here, I can just go ahead and open it up, and I have my invoice for Peterson, and I have all of my supporting documents behind the invoice, all the way down to how it was paid. In this case, it was they were issued a check, as you can see. So it has everything already attached, and it's already loaded into Sage 100 Contractor for me. Okay, so that's visibility. Let's jump back over now to Titanium. Let's talk about some efficiencies. So let's start at the point where an invoice arrives at your door. And one of the things that I mentioned is how we want to, our goal is to help eliminate the paper. We don't want to have an invoice that comes in, even if it comes in by email, you print it out, you have to put it in someone's folder. We don't want to have to do that. We want to eliminate that, all of that. So to do that, what happens is that when an invoice arrives at your door, you would go under data entry, there's an option to acquire, and you would determine who you're going to assign it to in accounts payable, what type of document you're acquiring, and then you have different options with which you can choose to be able to acquire invoices. One thing you can do is you can drag and drop. So if I had a document that was sitting, maybe an invoice that was sitting on my desktop, maybe it was in a folder, maybe it got emailed to me and I want to just go ahead and grab it and pull it in, I can just take that particular invoice, I can drag it here to the screen, and I continue, and you notice how it just opens up that particular invoice into the viewer for me. I have all kinds of options for annotating if I wanted to do different things here. And then if I open up this thumbnail, I can see all the succeeding pages. Now let's say that this came in and invoice, the first page of the invoice was for electrical wholesalers, and the second page was for a different vendor or a different invoice, separate invoice. So it's not basically one invoice with succeeding pages. These were two separate invoices. What you can do to separate these, you just right click, you hit split, see how it just separated them. This is now document 1, this is document 2. And then eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit acquire, and it's going to send these invoices off to my person or group of people that I assigned this to in accounts payable invoice entry. We'll go in there in a few minutes. So drag and drop is one option. Second option, invoices that arrive by email. TimberScan Titanium has an email monitoring tool. So what it can do is it can monitor an email address, and when it sees a document that arrives into that email address, it will take it, it will acquire it, and drop it into a folder, a file for you that we link to Titanium. So then I can just open up my email file here. Here are all my emailed invoices, and I just go down through, I scroll down, grab them all, and I pull them in, and then I hit continue, and they all just open up into the viewer. I didn't have to monitor the email address. I didn't have to drag and drop every single invoice image into the screen. The system basically compiled them for me, and they just pulled in here. And if there's something that came in that for some reason is, something that I didn't necessarily need to acquire, I can just take that document and I can say, just go ahead and delete that page. So now it's out. It's that simple. One other option, invoices that arrive in the mail. What you'll do in that case, you'll put them onto your scanning device. You'll scan them to a file that, again, we will link to Titanium. You'll just open up that scan file just the same way as if you were opening up your email file. All of your scanned invoices are compiled. You don't have to pull them in one at a time. You pull them in a batch, and it does the exact same thing that we just saw a second ago. So we've taken into account the different ways that the invoices would arrive. We also have an additional feature called auto acquire. So how auto acquire works is let's just say, for example, that I came in here and out of my email file, I take A1 Electric. So in here, I get an A1 Electric invoice, okay?
Mike, I have a question, sorry.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Someone's asking, does it connect to Outlook for the mail features?
Yes, it does. It does, yes, great question. Yep.
That was
Not only for being able to receive, but also for being able to send. So if I needed to email out to someone, it's going to connect to my Outlook and send it out through Outlook, yes. All right, so basically what I just did is I took this A1 Electric invoice, I pulled it into the viewer, and I'm just going to hit acquire. It came from my email file, right? Well, maybe what I could do is I could say, you know what? I know that A1 Electric, they send me invoices into my email file. So instead of me having to always go out and acquire them and set this up by saying who it's going to be assigned to and all of that and pull it out of the file myself, I'm going to set up an auto acquire for them. And I'm going to say, let's just say the sender is AP at A1Electric.com. It's coming into my AP email address. I'm going to auto assign it to where it needs to go in accounts payable. If they sent me more than one invoice, I'm figuring out a way that I can split these. Maybe there's some text on there that lets me split it. And then if there's OCR, which we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, it's going to go ahead and it's going to set that invoice up in my AP invoice entry. So with an emailed invoice, there is the possibility for you to have the system auto acquire invoices from some of your vendors, and you never even had to take this step at all. So again, talking about efficiency. Instead, not only is it efficient that it came in by email, I don't even have to go out and acquire it. The system's going to do it for me. Now, once it gets to AP invoice entry, and I kind of gave you a little bit of a snapshot here already of this. So let's make this a little bit smaller so we can see it better. Okay, so here's my AP entry grid. I want to talk about a few things with regard to this. First, the way that the system is designed, the invoice image you see in the upper part of the window. You've got your data entry grid down here in the lower part of the window. I can make this larger or smaller if I want. And you have your data entry. This is my header information. Here's my, all of my distribution information here. All of these fields are lined up in the exact same order as they are in Sage 100 Contractor. When you implement Titanium, we take these fields from Sage 100 Contractor and we pull them into Titanium. So if I were to go over now to Sage 100 Contractor and look at the AP entry, invoice number, order number, subcontract number, vendor job, all those same things are over here. Invoice number, order number, subcontract number, vendor job, all the same thing. Now, the beauty is that you can then start to move some of these around. If you said, you know what, I want my type to be in front of hot list, I'll just move it over. You can do those types of things. You can suppress some of these fields if you don't need them anymore. You can set this screen up to work the way that it's most convenient for you. But the way that we design it initially is we're basically replicating what you would do in Sage 100 Contractor, except that we've added a bunch of tools. Some of them I've already talked about, such as the tooltips. But here's another one. We also use optical character recognition in Titanium. And it works in two different ways. One way, you notice how some of these fields are highlighted. And if you notice that those fields that are highlighted, as I kind of hover the mouse over these, it's telling me what that field represents. And what it did was we used a solution called Google Vision. What Google Vision does is it allows for you to be able to, or not you, I shouldn't say, well, us together, but what we've done from a programming perspective is we've designed something called smart extraction. What it does is it goes out and it looks for the invoice number, the invoice date, the due date, the dollar amount. When it finds those fields, it will automatically extract them and it will populate for you. In this case, if there was a purchase order number on the invoice, it would also find the PO number and populate that. Now, this is not a brand new invoice, as you can see. Some of these fields have already been filled in, but you get the idea that I don't necessarily have to do anything from an OCR perspective for the system to be able to just go out and automatically read these fields. It's going to do it for you automatically. Unless you turn it off, it will read these so that it will populate this for you. What you can do, though, is you can add additional fields that you want the system to be able to read going forward. So first time I get an asphalt and paving invoice, I might say, you know what? I don't want to have to keep keying in their vendor code every time. I don't want to go out here and search the vendor file, go find the vendor code and have to put it in. What I do is I find it the very first time that I get my first invoice from asphalt and paving, and then you hit this little plus sign, and it adds that particular field to what's called the coding profile. So now, every invoice that comes in from this point forward, not only will it find the fields that we have set up for smart extraction automatically, but it's also going to populate the vendor code. Now I can add more to this. I could go out and I can actually open up what we call a template itself. And I can start, for example, maybe there's something on the invoice that indicates, maybe the job address. I could highlight the job address. Maybe it's, 12345 Main Street or something like that. That's the job address. I highlight that and say, use that as my job. I want to use that to identify the job number. And then it just automatically reads that address and populates the job number for me. Or if I know I'm going to be getting a bunch of invoices in from asphalt and paving for this particular job, again, I can just use the plus sign after that very first pass, and I'm able to just go ahead and it auto codes it for me. So we're trying to create the most efficient method possible for allowing you to be able to get the invoices processed as quickly as can be, and then get them off to the approvers. You have other tools here. I've already talked about history. You can also...
Mike, can I interrupt for a second before you start going into other tools? We do have a question.
Yep.
Someone's asking, they're saying they currently receive against POs in Sage, which creates a review status 2 invoice. How would we match the invoices up from TimberScan to the review status 2 invoices in Sage 100 Contractor?
So I believe, if I'm understanding the question correctly, so you've got purchase orders, and then when you send them, when you process the invoice, the status that gets sent over to the status that's getting reflected is called a review status. Is that correct? I think we're talking about this here. We're talking about the status here, right? This is the review status that I believe that they're referring to.
He says not. Steve, if you can respond in the chat, that would be great.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we continue on, and then we can circle back to this if need be. I believe what we're referring to is this status here, as being having a status of review. Okay, so I may get this.
He said that he is saying that that's what he was referring to. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I may have to actually get confirmation on this. But I believe what happens in Sage 100 Contractor is you set up the invoice. It's under that review status because you're processing it against a purchase order from Sage 100 Contractor. Do a receipt. Okay, so you've done the receipt. It sets it up as a status 2, which is under review, I assume, correct? Okay. So that being the case, you can do the same thing in Titanium. The only difference is that we don't necessarily have a quote unquote status flag that tells you, for example, that it's under review or what have you. But you can do the same thing. You can still process the invoice against a purchase order. So I can come in here, if this happened to be my PO, just as an example, we'll just use something. Right, I could go, these are work orders, but you get the idea. I can go out, I can select my PO, my receiver. It will then pull up the line item information from that PO in the receiver, and it will pull up the line item information for you. Now, we don't necessarily we don't set that status flag in Sage 100 Contractor, because from our perspective, once we've gone ahead, saved and routed the invoice, and it's updated Sage 100, it's already been processed. There's no need for that any additional review. It comes in as, and I forget the status that we send it into Sage 100 Contractor, but, and again, I can do a little bit more research on this, but I'm almost positive it does not go in there as review, because everything gets taken place on the front end here in Titanium. I hope that answered the question. Okay, a couple of other tools here. So we've got the entry screen here that we've talked about. I can move this around. If I decided there's an option here, if I said I wanted to hit the change mode button, I can now slide this so that I have the invoice on one side, and I've got the data entry on the other. Okay, I can move it back. I could also take this and I can disconnect it. I can move it off to a second screen. And so now I've got the invoice image on one screen. I've got my data entry on the other. If I want to pull it back, I just do this. Now, ultimately, what we're going to do is we're going to save and route the invoice. It's going to route it off to the approvers. And then they're going to come into Titanium. They're going to go into their document automation workflow task queue, and they're going to call up their invoices. Now, when they call up the invoice, basically what they'll do is they'll just pull it up. Got some notes here, as you can see. I see how it's coded. If I needed to go in and do any additional coding, I can do that. It gives me the flexibility. If you said, you know what, we don't want someone doing coding, you can set it up so that they're restricted. They're only going to see it in review status. I think I mentioned the various workflows that you can set up can be as elaborate as you need to be or as simple as you need it to be. So you've got all that available to you. You can approve, you can reject, you can put an invoice on hold. Now I should also mention, and this is going to be hard for me to do in this format here, so let me see if I can switch this a little bit. But it does give me, and I should have switched this format to form view. Okay. So it's a little hard to kind of display this because I'm using just trying to simulate this on here. But basically what you can do is you can set it up so that you can have the invoice, you can process the invoice, and you can do any coding that you need to on any type of device. So basically the system will just right size to whatever device you happen to be working on. So if I'm on my phone and I happen to not be in the office, I can just go ahead and call up my invoices on my phone, see all the information, and I have the ability to go in and start coding and do whatever I need to do. It gives me that flexibility to do that. It's not an actual app that you would download from the App Store, but what you can do is you can install it on your on any device, and what you'll see is this titanium wheel. When you click on the wheel, it will then open up your invoices and allow you to be able to go through and do your approvals that way if you want. If you put an invoice on hold or you reject it, you have to put a reason in as to why you're doing that. The system will require that so that if anybody else needs to know what the status is. If I jump back out of here, one of the other thing you'll notice is that we go back in again. You got a couple of other options here. I could, if I said, right up front, I know that this invoice, when I look at my details, oh, okay, this is not my invoice. I could just go ahead and reject it from here. You can put notes on an invoice. Notice how there have been some notes that have already been added to this particular invoice. They pop up in front of the invoice before you open it up so that you'll see them up front before I start doing any coding. But ultimately what's going to happen is we're going to approve the invoice and it's going to end up updating at some point, depending on how you want to set this up, where maybe you might want to have like a final review step, but it will update Sage 100 Contractor, and then I already showed you what happens in Sage 100 Contractor. Comes in, populates the data, and it also sends over the images. Okay, one last piece to the puzzle here. So what...
Mike, before you continue, the same person that was asking about the review status invoices, I don't know if you saw his question, what happens to the review invoice that was already created in Sage?
So I think that I maybe either I'm misunderstanding or I may need to do a little bit more research. But what's going to happen is this: if let's say you create a purchase order and a receiver inside Sage 100 Contractor. That does not mean that you're going to have to go into Sage 100 Contractor and actually enter the invoice. You're not going to be required to do that anymore. The idea is that you're going to set up your purchase order and your receiver in Sage 100 Contractor, and you'll process the invoice in Titanium, matching it against the PO and receiver. It pulls up the line items. So then when the invoice gets processed and gets sent over, there's no need for that invoice to be sitting in Sage 100 Contractor under that review status, because the invoice won't be there until you've gone through and processed the invoice through Titanium and approved it and sent it over. Now, what we could do, if I'm not understanding properly, what we could do is maybe offline we could talk about it a little bit further and I could get some more detail for you, but you're not going to be processing the invoice through Sage 100 Contractor. You're going to be processing it through Titanium, and then it updates Sage 100 Contractor with the details. Okay, let's go through one final step. So let's say you want to go ahead, you want to select invoices to pay, and you want to go ahead and pay your vendors. So Titanium has an option where I could select my invoices to pay, right? And we've built a tool that will allow, if you want, be able to capture the information that you would normally send to your printer, and we send that information back into Titanium. We drop it into what we call our pay control system. What this allows you to do is you could hypothetically, you could call up these payment records that you would normally have sent to a printer. Sorry, I may have gotten disconnected off of this particular version here. Bear with me one second. You may have, instead of sending these quote-unquote checks to a printer, we actually can simulate what would go to the printer and allow you to be able to see it in our system and then approve the invoices or approve the payments that you want to make. So apologies here, I did get disconnected. It's just reconnecting. It's going to take me just a second here. We have a process that we built internally that disconnects us from our database if we don't touch it for like a certain amount of time. And I was in the other application and showing you some things in there. I hadn't come in here, so it's been a while since I got in here. That's why it was taking so long to come in. So let's go search. And let's just try an example of one here. Okay, so what it does is it creates what looks like a check, assigns the Sage check number, has the invoices that the check is paying, and then that invoice information, and for some reason, someone must have taken that invoice out of here, but you'd be able to see the invoice images over here on the left-hand side. So I could basically just look at the payment. I could see what invoices it's paying. I've got all my details. And then when you hit the approve button, it just sends that invoice off to the Avid Pay Network, and Avid goes ahead and pays your vendor on your behalf. So it eliminates you from having to print checks. And we also have what's called the pay inquiry. What the pay inquiry does is it allows me to see what happens after I've released payments to the Avid Pay Network. So I kind of refer to this as the kind of the UPS tracker, where I could come in here, I could look at, here's Alpha Installation, here's the bank account it was drawn from, here's the Sage check number, here's the dollar amount. And if I wanted to, I could click on the plus sign, and it will show me all of the iterations, what happened as soon as it got released to the Avid Pay Network. I can see everything that happened along the way, when it was cleared, how it was paid, in this case, virtual card. And then if I wanted to, for every single transaction that we run through the Pay Network, you also get what's called the proof of payment document that we auto attach to the invoice. So this becomes kind of like that stub that's attached. Sideways here, but you get the idea. Okay, so I want to leave some time here at the end. We've kind of walked our way through that, that invoice to pay process, and hopefully you were able to see that you can do all of this without having to touch paper, create efficiencies, faster way to be able to process, invoices, and also be able to not necessarily have to cut checks if you don't want. Now, that doesn't mean that every single payment has to go through the pay control system. You can have certain scenarios where you print some checks and then you use pay control for the rest, but it certainly creates a lot more efficiencies for you. And with that, Amy, why don't we open it up for any last questions?
Sure. If anyone has a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat. There is one here. I think you addressed this already. Is there a way to prevent setup on a mobile device?
To prevent setup?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can restrict it so that someone can't do this on a mobile. Yes. But if you want them to be able to access it, you can do that as well. It's basically almost like if you said, I don't want someone to be able to see Titanium, you don't install it on their laptop, for example. Same thing with their phone. You just don't install it. They don't get it.
Any other questions? What's the cost?
Well, that's something that you're gonna have to work through with your sales team from Aktion. We work with them very closely, but that is something that I think would be best if we had them address it with you.
Yeah. Well, I can get your sales rep to reach out to you. We like it when people want to know the cost. That means you're interested in
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty cool.
Exactly.
I've sat in on a lot of these webinars now, and it's pretty neat what it can do.
Yeah. And for the person that was asking that question about the status, if there's still some question about that, if you don't mind, go ahead and send Amy your question if you can, and detail it, and I'll try to get it answered. If I can't answer it, I'll make sure that I get it answered through our consulting team.
Yeah, and we can try to address it on our side as well. So
Yep.
If you still have questions too, definitely let me know. And I'll look to see who your sales rep is. We have to use the AvidXchange.
Do we have to use AvidXchange? I'm not sure what that means. If you're talking about from the pay side, the answer is no. So if you're saying, can I process my invoices, update Sage 100 Contractor, but still cut checks? You can. You're not forced to have to do this pay control system. You can also set it up so that you do some of your payments electronically and you still cut checks in other cases. That's an option as well.
Does TimberScan run on SQL like Sage?
It does. It's a SQL backend. Yes.
And the person's asking, is TimberScan and AvidXchange two separate items or all in one?
Is it two separate? I'm sorry, Amy.
So AvidXchange is just the corporate brand, right? There's nothing. TimberScan is the product. AvidXchange is who Mike works for, is the technology provider.
Right.
Am I saying that correct, Mike?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, she gets it now.
We good?
I believe so. Anyone else?
All right.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for taking time to be with us this afternoon. We appreciate it. And like I said earlier on at the beginning of the webinar, it is being recorded and you will receive a link to the presentation in the next 24 hours. And if you have any questions or you need information on pricing or how to go about moving forward, your sales rep will be copied on the email that I send out to you. So they'll be aware that you were on today's presentation and can reach out to you and help you in any way they can.
Yes. Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.